Well, guys, you know what? I think we're just going to jump right in. I really appreciate you being here. I am Jack Rudo. I publish Stapled Spine, Portland's Horror Fanzine, and also an volunteer DJ on X-Ray FM here in town. I do Stapled Sounds, which is a dumb name for a radio show, but it is a spin-off of my zine, so what the hell. And sitting next to me is actually a personal hero of mine. I'm going to read, you laugh, it's true. I'm going to read the Wikipedia, so let's see how we do here. Just the block, just the opening block. Come on,
all right, the opening.
We got 40 minutes to kill, these guys don't.
Whoa.
All right, I'll skip the birth date, how about that? Sam Irvin is an American film and television director, producer, screenwriter, actor, author, and film teacher. Irvin's directing credits include Guilty as Charged, Oblivion, Elvira's Haunted Hills, and all episodes of two series, Dante's Cove and From Here On Out. Out is all capital.
Yes.
His other credits include co-executive producer on Bill Condon's Academy Award winner, Gods and Monsters, a personal favorite of mine. Please tell me that if you haven't seen the movie, please go find that movie, Gods and Monsters. Associate producer of Brian De Palma's Home Movies and historical consultant on the Tony Award winner Liza's At the Palace. Irvin authored the acclaimed biography Kate Thompson, From Funny Face to Eloise on Simon & Schuster, the children's book parody Sam's Toilet Paper Caper, and the novel Orbgasm, an erotic pulp sci-fi satiricon. Irvin has won 2 back-to-back rondos. Are they back-to-back?
This is a little dated. I have now won 6 Rondo Awards.
I see the Dexter meme. I have failed you.
I know. It's an embarrassment of riches.
6 Rondo Awards.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm sorry. This is dumb. I'm not going to keep reading this. The reason I'm just tickled to get to sit here with Sam. We met last year at Portland's Queer Film Festival, where he was, what did JT was? It was guest of honor. It was lifetime achievement.
He gave me a lifetime achievement award. I felt very old at that point.
But I know Sam because he did a very early. I mean, if you don't consider the 1930s pulp fanzines, but in the 60s, the first gen of American horror fanzines. Sam did that as a teen, and his book that he also has at his table is a ridiculous embarrassment of interview riches. His life it should be called No Closed Doors. So that is my intro to Sam. Sam, would you please tell the audience, in your own words, your story, please?
Oh man. We don't have enough time. I've done so many things. I'm so old. I'm a fanboy from the beginning. I grew up in Asheville, North Carolina. My dad was a movie theater owner, and so I was able to see movies over and over as a kid, long before home video. We're talking growing up in the 60s and 70s. And I saw first run at my dad's theater, Pit and the Pendulum, in 1961 at the age of 5, and that changed my life. I fell in love with Vincent Price, I fell in love with Roger Corman and Edgar Allan Poe and Richard Matheson and the whole 9 yards. And many decades later, got to direct Elvira's Haunted Hills, which was a spoof of Pit and the Pendulum, and it was dedicated to Vincent Price, and I got the job because I had memorized Vincent Price's monologue from Pit and the Pendulum. Do you know where you are, Bartolome? You're about to enter hell, etc., etc. I won't bore you with it. And when Cassandra Peterson heard that, she said, "You're hired." That's how I got the job. But I decided I wanted to be a director in 1964 when I was 8. My dad took us on a trip to California and got us a VIP tour at Warner Brothers, and I stepped on the set of Blake Edwards' The Great Race, where they were shooting this big iceberg scene in a tank of water, and all the stars were on it. Natalie Wood, Jack Lemmon, Peter Falk, Tony Curtis, and I couldn't believe that this was being created on a soundstage, and I was like, that's what I want to do. So I took my dad's 8mm home movie camera out of his hand and never gave it back. And in my teens, I started my own horror fanzine, Bazaar, and it was just labor of love, and I started corresponding with horror stars by mail and doing interviews with questionnaires and stuff, because I was just in North Carolina. But when I was 17, I graduated from high school, and I convinced my parents as a high school graduation present to send me to London so I could interview all my Hammer film greats, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, Ingrid Pitt, Donald Pleasance, and you name it. I interviewed.
Disgusting.
Yeah, it's disgusting. Vincent Price and Terrence Fisher and everybody. And I collected I did 35 interviews. I went back to London the following summer. It was so successful that my parents I got them to send me again. So I collected all 35 of those interviews into a book called I Was a Teenage Monster Hunter: How I Met Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and more. And those books are on my table. It's an amazing book. I talk about, in addition to the interviews, I do, kind of introduction to each one of how I bamboozled each interview. Like Christopher Lee invited me to have lunch with him at Pinewood Studios, where he happened to be shooting a little film called Man with the Golden Gun. And I got to spend the rest of the day on a Bond set with him. And having a limo ride back to London with he and Hervé Villechaize, which was quite interesting.
I cannot recommend this book highly enough. It is ridiculous. I read my copy probably 5 times just because I keep putting Post-it notes in it for things I want to talk about.
But anyway, so, and then my most recent book, and this will finally get into the panel that we're talking about today, which is, there was an adaptation of Frankenstein in 1973 called Frankenstein: The True Story. That it was a 2-part NBC production, and it just freaking blew me away. I put it on the cover of my fanzine Bazaar in 1974 when I was 18. When I went to London, I got to interview several people involved in the film, including Jane Seymour, who played the female creature. But then flash forward 30 some odd years, Little Shop of Horrors magazine got me to write a whole issue on the making of the film, and that I won one of those Rudo awards that we were talking about for Article of the Year. Then Shout Factory got me to do all of the extras for the restoration edition of Frankenstein: The True Story, and I won another Rudo award for audio commentary, and I interviewed Jane Seymour on camera this time at her home in Malibu, and I went to London and got an interview on camera with Leonard Whiting, who played Dr. Frankenstein, and there are other things on the extras and stuff. It's a really great thing. The movie's never looked better than it is here. And so for the 50th anniversary of the film, which was last year, I decided to do a little pamphlet on the making of the film, which is just 400 pages. It's a whole cinder block with 1,350 photos. And I got Anne Rice to write the foreword before she passed away. It was the movie that inspired her to write Interview with the Vampire. And I got a director you might have heard of named Guillermo del Toro to write the afterword. It's a film that is very inspirational to him, and he's right now directing his own Frankenstein film. It's been shooting ever since January. They are still in production. It's a humongous production with a huge all-star cast: Oscar Isaac, Christoph Waltz, Mia Goth, Jacob Elordi, Charles Dance. It's going to be amazing. But anyway, if you look up obsession in the dictionary, there's a picture of me holding my book. So it's truly an obsession. And I have copies of this book at my table, if anybody's interested afterwards, as well as these Blu-rays. But, okay, so much for me and the commercial.
So let's start. I know how to start this. This is excellent.
Great.
I know it is. This is Page to Pixel, which is a new series that we're working on here at PRGE. Sean Harrington, one of the creators of this show, tapped me at the local Frankenstein comic shop. First question I want to know, anyone here from out of Portland? Outside of Portland? Okay, how about outside of Oregon? Okay, where are you guys from?
Seattle.
Okay, we won't hold that against you. No, but Frankenstein Comic Swap is a show that happens twice a year here in Portland at our old dead mall, the Lloyd Center, and it's a fantastic place to get together with all the people that are creatives in physical media here in town. And I was contacted last October asking, hey, we want to start doing more horror programming at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo. And so this, of course, working with Sam was a natural, because last year, Sam was in town as a special guest for the Queer Horror Film Festival. Now, my zine does the program for them. It's kind of an ash can. You flip one side, it's a program for the film festival. The other side is my zine half, which is an interview. And when I was looking for photos of Sam, you know where I'm going with this. The photo that I used for the cover is Sam in, you know, the old Ben Cooper plastic mask and flammable smock costume? It's a picture of him as a little redheaded child in the Frankenstein monster costume. So the man has green in his blood. Absolutely.
Guilty as charged. Yep.
So I guess we're going to go from page to pixel, but let's start page. Would you walk us through however your mind sees this timeline or tapestry?
Yeah.
To just flow from Shelley to
wherever
you feel?
As many of you may know, the way that the Frankenstein novel came about in 1818, Mary Shelley was about 18 years old, maybe 17, and she and her friends, Lord Byron, her fiance Percy Bysshe Shelley, she wasn't actually Mary Shelley yet, she was Mary Wollstonecraft, and but she went with her fiance and Lord Byron's lover, Dr. Polidori, he was also Lord Byron's physician, and they vacationed at Lake Geneva in Switzerland. And one night they challenged them, there was a challenge for the group to write horror stories. And out of that, Lord Byron kind of didn't really do much, and Percy Shelley didn't really do much, but Mary Shelley and Dr. Polidori came up with two books that were very, very groundbreaking. Dr. Polidori wrote Vampire, V-A-M-P-Y-R-E, which was the very first known vampire novel ever. It predated Varney the Vampire, predated Carmilla, predated Dracula by like 50, 60 years. And so that was pretty groundbreaking for sure, but it didn't even begin to compare to the legacy that Mary did, which was to write Frankenstein. And that came out in 1818, and you know, I don't think that they realized even then what a classic it would turn into. It was adapted into a couple of different versions of stage plays. It didn't set the world on fire, you know, and it wasn't something that was wildly influential. What actually started to bring it to a much wider audience was when it was made into the first Frankenstein film. You're going to think it's Karloff, but no. Thomas Edison made a version of Frankenstein. It was a silent film in 1910. Now, I don't have a good sense of how, you know, widely seen that was, but certainly silent films were very, very popular. But it didn't, I don't think that it, again, I don't think it changed the world, you know, I don't think it completely took America or the world by storm. The movie that, of course, did was the 1931 James Whale directed Frankenstein that featured Boris Karloff, a relatively, not unknown, but certainly not a star at that time. He got fourth billing in the movie, playing the Frankenstein monster with that iconic makeup that Jack Pierce designed with the high forehead and the bolts in the neck and everything. And when you think of Frankenstein, all of the tropes of Frankenstein really come from that movie. Up until that time, electricity was never mentioned in Mary Shelley's book. You would think that electricity would be in the Thomas Edison version, but no, the monster was brought to life with chemical bath. So the whole idea of of bringing the monster to life with electricity was this very innovative thing. I mean, when you think about if somebody has a heart attack, what do? They take those things and, clear, and they, charge him with electricity to make the heart start beating again. And that concept was used in this 1931 Frankenstein, and the kites and trying to bring down the bolts of lightning from the heavens was such a cool thing, because this wasn't just man-made electricity. This was coming from the heavens, from the gods, and bringing reanimating these body parts that have been sewn together for the Frankenstein monster. And so it really, that all came from that movie, and just about every Frankenstein film since then, it borrows from James Whale's vision of how to do a Frankenstein film. And when you think of the makeup, I mean, gosh, when you think of Frankenstein, on every t-shirt, every cartoon, everything, I mean, there's been a million other Frankenstein monsters that look nothing like Karloff, because Universal owns the rights to that design. And
that makeup itself is protected.
It's protected.
Yeah.
So you can't just do it without licensing it from them. So lots of films came up with their own look, just because they didn't want to have to pay for those rights. But the one look that truly lives on iconically is the Karloff makeup, and it was subsequently used on other Universal Frankenstein movies. Karloff played the monster in the first three: Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, and Son of Frankenstein. Then in the next one was Ghost of Frankenstein, and Lon Chaney Jr. took over playing the monster and wears that same makeup. Then we go to Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, and Bela Lugosi is wearing the Frankenstein the monster makeup in that. And actually Bela Lugosi had been offered the part of the monster in the James Whale version, and he was like, no, I'm not going to be in makeup all day and have no lines. What are you talking about? And well, he said that in a very Hungarian accent.
Yes.
But he, was a little more realistic about, needing work by the time Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman came around, and he played the monster. But ironically, he had also played Igor in Son of Frankenstein and Ghost of Frankenstein, and they transplant his brain into the monster. So he kind of does this crossover where he's now playing the monster along with his brain, along with Igor's brain.
And
So
he's
very meta.
such a creepy Igor.
Oh my God.
He's gross with his broken neck.
Yes. I'm telling you, I mean, I love Bela Lugosi's Dracula, but my favorite performance of his is Igor. I think he's just amazing. I think it's great. But, and then after Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, then we go to House of Frankenstein, which Glenn Strange, who was a stunt actor, played the monster in that. They brought back Glenn Strange for House of Dracula. These were the Monsteramas, where all the monsters are in those films. And then Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein. Glenn Strange plays him in that as well. And Bela Lugosi finally gets to play Dracula in Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein, which was the original Dracula was also from 1931, and Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein is 1948. How many times did Bela Lugosi play Dracula in a movie between 1931 and 1948? Anybody know? 0. It's astonishing that his most famous role, they got everybody except him to play it. John Carradine played Dracula in House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula. Son of Dracula was Lon Chaney Jr. Dracula didn't even appear in Dracula's Daughter. He did play vampires in Mark of the Vampire, and he played sort of what turned out to not be a vampire in what was it? Am I confusing Mark? The one The one where it turns out that they're just posing as vampires.
Oh, these are, sorry, spoiler warning
Yeah.
for these new releases.
Exactly. But anyway, he didn't genuinely get to play Dracula again on screen until Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein, which is kind of crazy. But anyway, I want to just go back for 1 second to 1931 when Frankenstein comes out. That was a really major turning point for the entire horror genre. Universal that year released Dracula in the early part of the year with Bela Lugosi, and Frankenstein later in the year with Boris Karloff as the monster. And if there were ever two films that completely set the world on fire, they were gigantic hits, and it really set the tone for the entire horror genre. There had been horror films. I mean, you know, Lon Chaney Sr. was Phantom of the Opera, a silent film, and he also did Hunchback of Notre Dame and different things, but nothing quite set the world on fire like this two punches of Dracula and Frankenstein back to back in 1931. And it saved Universal, the studio, and it just created this whole genre that just was on fire forever.
It lit the world on fire again with the shock package.
Yes.
In the 60s.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why, you know, that's kind of the big jump there, is that when these movies were licensed to be shown on local television, you had a whole new generation of kids. The monster kid world exploded. I mean,
Yeah.
you're obviously a product of that.
Oh, absolutely. I was born in 1956, and they put out they syndicated a package called Shock, and it just gathered up all the Universal classics and started showing them on television in local stations. And if the local stations had a budget, they would create a horror host. And in my local Asheville, North Carolina, they didn't have a budget, so we just had a little title card that said Shock Theater on Saturday afternoons after Dick Clark's American Bandstand. And if you were a monster kid like me, you were glued. You were right there watching it every week. And I just absolutely fell in love with those early films. To this day, Bride of Frankenstein is my absolute all-time favorite movie. But at the same time that they were starting to come out and syndicate those movies, Hammer Films in England decided to try their shot at rebooting Frankenstein and Dracula and everything, and they started their very first major hit. They'd been making films for years, but the first really major crossover hit was Curse of Frankenstein in 1957. That introduced Peter Cushing as Dr. Frankenstein and Christopher Lee as the monster. And it was a massive hit for them, and it led to them the very next year doing Horror of Dracula, again reuniting Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. Christopher Lee now playing Dracula and Peter Cushing playing Van Helsing. And that started two franchises for Hammer Films, and they were in color for the first time. They were very bloody and gory. And
the title's like Taste the Blood of Dracula.
Taste the Blood of Dracula.
Like it's just straight up like blah.
Yeah, I love it. And the ladies were, you know, low cut and a lot of very buxom cleavage and everything, and that just made it sexier and bloodier and more colorful than the stuffy old, you know, Universal ones that were showing on TV. Mm-hmm. They had to do something that audiences hadn't seen before, and the Frankenstein series was just absolutely terrific. I like almost every one of them that they did. It started with Curse of Frankenstein, as I mentioned, then Revenge of Frankenstein in 1958, just 1 year later. Then Evil of Frankenstein in 1964, if I'm not mistaken. And that was actually financed by Universal Pictures. So guess what? The monster could have a high forehead and have a little bit of the same look. And Roy Ashton, the great Hammer Film makeup artist, did not one of his absolute best designs ever, but it is reminiscent of the silhouette of the Karloff look. And right around that same time in 1964, Universal did a television series called The Munsters. And here we have Herman Munster, because it's Universal, can wear that same Karloff-inspired makeup with the high forehead and everything. And that looked very much like, very much like, more like Glenn Strange, actually. But Hammer Films continued doing their Frankenstein films, and the next one after Evil of Frankenstein was Frankenstein Created Woman, and this had a very sexy Playboy playmate named Susan Denberg, who played this beautiful woman who was brought to life. And then the next one after that was my very favorite of all the Hammer film Frankenstein films, which was Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. And this had Freddie, all of them had, up till then, had Peter Cushing as Dr. Frankenstein, brilliant. And in Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, Freddie Jones plays the monster. And then they decided we need to go after the youth market, and we need to make Dr. Frankenstein younger. And they used Ralph Bates, a younger British actor who had played a role in Taste of the Blood of Dracula, and he was Henry Jekyll in Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde. And they brought him in to play Dr. Frankenstein in Horror of Frankenstein. And it had a lot of kind of dark humor to it. It was very different in style to the other ones that had gone before. And the monster in that one was played by Dave Prowse, who went on to do Darth Vader in all the Star Wars movies. Very tall guy. He had actually played the Frankenstein monster in a tiny cameo in a James Bond movie called Casino Royale, the rogue comedy Casino Royale from the 60s. It was just this crazy comedic thing with everybody from Peter Sellers to Woody Allen to, whatever. You can't even really count it as a Bond film, but it sort of was. And there's Dave Prowse's Frankenstein lumbering through, one of the crazy scenes. But then that Horror of Frankenstein for Hammer Films did not do well, and so they went back to the original formula, which was Peter Cushing playing Dr. Frankenstein, and they made one more called Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. And they brought back Dave Prowse to play the monster again, although a completely different look. He's completely buried in makeup as this sort of Neanderthal, half-ape looking, hairy beast, and you can't even see him or recognize him.
Like the skull cap kind of.
Yes, exactly. And that was the last of the Frankenstein films that Hammer did. That was it was actually shot in 1972, but didn't come out until 74. And this movie, Frankenstein the True Story, kind of was made and came out in between, it was made after Frankenstein the Monster from Hell was shot, but Frankenstein the Monster from Hell came out after Frankenstein the True Story. Frankenstein the True Story had nothing to do with Hammer Films or anything, but it was Universal. And they wanted to, basically the producer of this, his name is Hunt Stromberg Jr., he was this amazing gay monster kid who had grown up. His dad was a huge producer at MGM and had produced like all the Thin Man movies and The Women, and he won an Oscar for The Great Ziegfeld, and he did musicals with, and just everything. But he also produced Mask of Fu Manchu in 1932, just a year after Frankenstein, and it starred Boris Karloff and Kenneth Strickfaden, who had done all the electrical equipment in Frankenstein, all the laboratory stuff, did all the electrical equipment in Mask of Fu Manchu. Well, this budding producer was only like 8 years old or 9 years old, and he was just rabid. He was on set every day. He became friends with Karloff. He became friends with Kenneth Strickfaden, the electrical guy, and he just became a monster kid. He loved Frankenstein, and then when they were shooting Bride of Frankenstein when he was 11 at Universal, because he knew Karloff and he knew Kenneth Strickfaden, who was doing the electrical equipment again, he got to go visit that set and met Elsa Lanchester, who was simultaneously doing a film with his dad at MGM called Naughty Marietta, but she was going back and forth between studios while she was shooting Bride of Frankenstein.
Elsa was the bride.
Yeah, Elsa played the bride, sorry. And so this young producer, or budding producer, grew up knowing all these people. And and then in the 50s, he was head of programming for a local ABC affiliate in Los Angeles, where he created a little show called The Vampira Show, which was the very first horror host show ever. And he discovered Mila Nurmi and created Vampira and wrote the scripts and directed her and everything and turned that into the phenomenon that is still going today, which is all horror hosts.
And she was Astoria class of 1949, so she's a Oregonian. She's ours as well.
There you go.
Don't let anyone take that away from you.
Exactly. So, and then he became head of programming at CBS, where he helped champion and create and oversaw shows like Alfred Hitchcock Presents, The Twilight Zone, The Munsters, The Wild Wild West, Gilligan's Island, The Carol Burnett Show, who he discovered. He discovered Carol Burnett at UCLA. He put her on TV for the very first time. He discovered Clint Eastwood, who had only had a tiny part in
Creature.
Yes,
Return. He's an unnamed. If you watch
Yep.
Return, it's the second one, I believe.
Yes.
He's an unnamed
Maybe Revenge of the
lab
King.
assistant.
Yeah,
And he's
and
got
then-
a mouse in his pocket, and he has
and-
no lines, I think.
And exactly. And
it's
then
like
he
a
did-
17-year-old Clint Eastwood in a
Yes.
lab coat.
and Tarantula.
Yes.
He's a pilot, and he has a mascot. You can just see his eyes. But this producer, Hans Stromer Jr., discovered him, and he cast him in the Western series. And now I'm drawing a blank, but whatever the huge Western series that CBS did back then. And anyway, he was just this amazing guy. But he was a huge monster kid. And in 1962. There was a series called Route 66, and he wanted to do a Halloween special. And he wanted to have all these monsters. So he called up his family friend, Boris Karloff, and said, would you please come and be in this, and you have to wear your Frankenstein monster makeup again. And Karloff had sworn off never doing it again, but he talked him into it. And so the very last time Karloff ever put on that makeup was for that TV series episode in 1962.
Gotta be on YouTube, I would hope.
And he called up Lon Chaney Jr. and got him to do the Wolfman makeup, the Mummy makeup, and even did a tribute to Lon Chaney Jr.'s father, Lon Chaney Sr., and did Hunchback of Notre Dame, all in this episode. He had Peter Lorre in it. He got Martita Hunt from the Hammer Films Brides of Dracula. It was the most incredible episode for Monster Kid. I saw it live, I mean, not live, but I mean, I saw it when it first aired on Halloween in 1962, and was just blown away. So then when Hunt left CBS to become an independent producer, his dream was to make Frankenstein, the True Story, as a magnum opus. It's kind of combining the first two Frankenstein films, Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, into one. And he got an all-star cast, James Mason, Leonard Whiting, Michael Sarrazin played the creature, David McCallum from The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Jane Seymour is the female creature, Agnes Moorehead, who everybody knows as Endora from Bewitched, but was an incredible actress. And he tried to get Elsa Lanchester to play the role that Agnes Moorehead ended up playing, and Elsa Lanchester being the bride. But she was committed to another film and couldn't do it. She really wanted to do it though. And there's also Sir John Gielgud and Sir Ralph Richardson and Tom Baker of Doctor Who. I mean, it's just everybody's in this movie. And it was the most expensive television production up to that time, the most expensive horror film, theatrical or otherwise, up to that time. and it just was really remarkable. If you haven't seen it, you owe it to yourself to see it. Do not stream it on Prime. They are showing the butchered 2-hour version that was briefly theatrically released in Europe and was trashed by every critic because it made no sense. A third of the movie's missing. So you have to get it on the Shout Factory Blu-ray to get the whole 3-hour version. And then, you know, many other Frankenstein films followed after that. Of course, the most famous one probably being the one that Francis Ford Coppola produced, that was directed by Kenneth Branagh and starred Kenneth Branagh, and Robert De Niro played the monster. With an all-star cast, Helena Bonham Carter plays the bride. There was also a film called The Bride with Sting and Jennifer.
They played the crap out of that on HBO
Yes.
and Cinemax in the 80s. It was always on.
I know.
Sam, I'm sorry, we're already almost out of time.
Oh my God,
No, it's okay. No, this man can go, and his stories are gold, I'm telling you. Okay, I want to touch base here really quick, and this
Yes.
is more interactive here.
Thank you. Shut me up.
No, I don't want to.
I'm teasing.
I want to run through some video game sites here, and this is more interactive. I want to know, as I read these little blurbs here, I want to know if anyone in this room played it. We're going to start with the first one I have that I want to bring up. Atari 2600's Frankenstein's Monster. Anyone? Yes, in the back?
Whoa!
You had the Atari 2600?
Sure did.
Wow!
Did the game live up to the box art? That's my question.
Absolutely not.
Yeah! All right, next up, I've got from CRL. This was a 1987 PC game, Frankenstein the video game. Also on the Commodore, it looks like it was also on. Anyone play the Commodore Frankenstein? No? Okay, moving on. I want to save a little bit of time for Q&A with Sam here. We just got a few minutes. Frankenstein the Monster Returns. Now this is an NES card. Did anyone have the Frankenstein the Monster? Yes?
What?
Oh, there we go. Okay, all right. No, she's raising so sheepishly back there. Come on. Oh, I know you got him. All right, well, good.
Did that one live up to the box art?
No. It was
And what did you say?
I said no.
Yeah, no, we had no and that.
No and that. Okay.
Okay, now we're moving to 1992's Game Boy, Dr. Franken. I keep hoping as we get closer, people. Yes? Oh, you don't?
No, sorry.
No, Dr. Franken? Okay, yeah, two more here. Okay, so now we've got Frankenstein Through the Eyes of the Monster. This had Tim Curry doing the voice of Dr. Frankenstein.
Wow.
And this was a full motion video
From
CGI clip.
Frankenfurter to Frankenstein.
Yes, exactly. This was on Sega Saturn and the Jaguar. Yeah, I'm already like in an empty room when I mention those two consoles.
Wow.
Okay, and the last one here, this one looks like a little kiddie one. This is Game Boy Advance, Monster Force. Any Monster Force Game Boy Advance?
Well, it sounds like in the world of gaming, Frankenstein has yet to set the world on fire.
Well, it's usually a large cog in a bigger piece, like Castlevania from the first all the way through is a beloved to see the heads are not even
There you go.
Castlevania.
Okay.
I knew that'd be an easy one there. He's definitely, it hasn't even captured like the entire main character feel there. And I don't know, I mean, obviously there's also pinball. I just wanted a few. There's a lot of them out there.
Maybe this Guillermo del Toro movie will spur something on. He's basing the look on the Bernie Wrightson artwork.
Yes, Dark Horse Comics published an amazing Bernie Wrightson drawn.
Yeah.
I was going to bring it down here. I talked myself out of taking it on the train to come down here. But if you can find that, it is fantastic. So many different treasury editions of that. It's marvelous. It's wonderful.
Yeah. And ironically, there's another Frankenstein film, the big, huge budget one, that Maggie Gyllenhaal is directing, not acting in. You know, Jake's sister, who's a huge actress, it's one of her first films. And, you know, she has this fairly unknown guy, Christian Bale, playing the monster.
Never heard of him. Hey, here, let's hear for Lisa Frankenstein.
Oh,
Lisa Frankenstein. Yes, absolutely.
There we go.
So let's open up. I think we got, maybe just less than 5 minutes. Any questions for Sam here? Go ahead, please.
Well, have you seen I did see Lisa Frankenstein in the theaters, but the Frankenstein movie
Which one?
I maybe saw before that, not counting, as far as live action ones, not
Mhm.
counting Hotel Transylvania is on. I Frankenstein, it was like.
Oh, I, Frankenstein, yeah.
With Aaron Eckhart.
Aaron Eckhart.
Thoughts on that one?
I was not really a big fan of that
I
one.
think it even
That
was-
reminded me of
I think it
DC
even-
Comics have the Creature Commandos, and then they also in DC Comics their Frankenstein monster is more of like a military, like he's got like a German. He looks like Adam and the Ant, the old band jackets
Yeah.
they were wearing.
I think it even,
Yeah.
I think it even was shown in 3D and in
Mhm.
the story, he's like Frankenstein monsters living in the present day. And
Yeah.
it felt a little like unreal.
This man directed an Elvira movie, people. Come on. Thank you for your question. Anybody else? Yes.
So, what was your experience working on the Elvira movie? Tell me one of your stories.
The Elvira film was the most fun movie I've ever made. It was so incredible. We, I don't know, we never stopped laughing. What was so cool about it is that because it was a spoof of the Vincent Price Edgar Allan Poe movies, we were shooting in Romania where we could afford, with the cheap labor there, to build the sets to specification from the ground up. And that was what was so exciting to me, because I sent to the production designer all the movies to look at and said, oh, we want the living room, the castle to look like this, and the stairs to look like the stairs in this one, and we built 2 dungeons, one with the Pit and the Pendulum and another.
Hers.
Yeah, and I'm like, I want the other dungeon to have the sort of scaffolding stairs from the Haunted Palace, and he just duplicated everything. It was fantastic. And anyway, I can't think of any specific stories that were amusing of the shoot, but it just at every turn, everybody was cracking up. We couldn't, get through the scenes. They were just so funnily written in the script. My favorite line is Dr. Bradley is showing Elvira around the castle and giving her the tour, and he says, "The village people say this house is haunted," and she goes, "Who listens to the village people anymore?" And anyway, if you haven't seen it, it's.
And now that Cassandra Peterson is a Oregonian as well, we're going to try and get Sam as often as possible. That's my mission, is to make all the horror gods fall in love with Portland.
Yeah, bring
Anybody
John
else?
Carpenter over too.
Anybody else? All the way in the back.
So this was actually briefly touched on yesterday during your panel with Jack and Friends.
Oh, yeah, that was all trash.
Castlevania games. There is definitely a depiction of the Frankenstein monster throughout some of those games.
In which
have
games? I'm
you
sorry.
played any of those, or are you aware of that depiction at all?
Which games?
Well, really any of them, but specifically the first Castlevania game in particular.
Yes. At that time, though, I got ridiculously sucked into a thing called Ravenloft, which is horror role-playing. It's D&D's horror realm. And they have a whole realm that is, they completely just took the Frankenstein mythos and ran with it with novels, and it is exhaustive. It's amazing what they did with it there. So unfortunately, the 80s golden era of either pinball, I was sucked into tabletop role-playing, but I was immersed in Ravenloft, and it's amazing stuff that does gothic horror spectacularly. So I'm sorry, no, I did not. Other than the first Castlevania, yes. I hear that music in my sleep sometimes. It's fantastic.
I think we all do after we played it for a little while.
Absolutely, and I remember walking around wishing I had all the different whips. It was wonderful. Anybody else? Yes.
How do you feel about Young Frankenstein?
Oh my God, I absolutely love Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein. It was 1974, started shooting right after, 2 months after this movie aired. And there's no question in my mind that when the monster goes to the blind man's, the blind fiddler's little hut, And Gene Hackman plays the blind fiddler in Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein, and it's kind of uncredited. It's not, it's this surprise cameo. But that was based on the blind hermit from Bride of Frankenstein, and also the blind man in Frankenstein, the True Story, was played by Sir Ralph Richardson. And you can see little bits that they were influenced by from Frankenstein, the True Story, in addition to, of course, the main inspiration being Bride of Frankenstein. But I loved Young Frankenstein. It's absolutely one of my all-time favorite films. I thought that it's interesting that you bring that up, because when people ask me about, my feelings about Elvira's Haunted Hills, I'm like, the way that Mel Brooks was doing a love letter to the Universal horror films, the Universal Frankenstein films, I'm doing a love letter to the Vincent Price, Edgar Allan Poe films in Elvira's Haunted Hills. And I was very much inspired by what he had done with that. And by the way, in the laboratory scenes, Mel Brooks found the electrical equipment.
It was in a garage.
Yeah, from the original Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein that was designed by Kenneth Strickfaden. Now, I was executive producer on Gods and Monsters in 1998, directed by Bill Condon, won the Oscar for Best Screenplay. And it's about, Brendan Fraser, Lynn Redgrave, and it's about James Whale, the director of Bride of Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, played by Ian McKellen, but it's in the later part of his life. But there's a flashback scene of him directing Bride of Frankenstein on the laboratory set, which I made sure was designed and built to specification, and we found that same electrical equipment. And so it has appeared in Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Young Frankenstein. Frankenstein means, Dracula means Frankenstein, this god-awful B movie from the 60s, which I'm trying not to let it.
And Gods and Monsters.
And Gods and Monsters. But anyway, that electrical equipment has been around.
Thank you guys so much for the time you spent. Here's for Sam Irvin.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and here are a few more videos for you to check out.